The US military has managed to stabilize their forces in the country of Niger, which is a good thing because they were under a constant threat of an all-out African war, and the US military may have had to pull out of Niger, Africa. But nonetheless, that threat is over, but now there's a new threat in the country of Mali. You see, the country of Mali is quite literally falling apart right under our noses. No one's talking about it, and Russia is loving this because now the United States might be under threat to look like the bad guys in Niger, and they're not able to do their job. I'll explain all of this, so let's get into this video and talk about how Mali is now the new threat for the United States in Africa. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand if you're new to the party is that we love to generalize that all of Africa must be dangerous. I mean, when you hear about Africa, it's only bad things. But this is just a stereotype and generalization. This is not exactly true. The region in Africa that is the most dangerous place in the world statistically is known as the Sahel. The Sahel has seen the most rapid growth and violent bad guy groups activity of any region in Africa over the past 2 years. Okay, so understand that the Sahel region is where the hotspot of bad guys are throughout the world. Like if you're going to try and find some bad guys, you can walk in the Sahel and within 30 minutes you'll find them. And that's why the US military is in the Sahel. So that's why I'm trying to paint this picture for you so it all makes sense. Another good reason to be in the Sahel, especially for Russia, is to make a little money if you are a private security contracting company or a mercenary group trying to make a quick buck. Like $200 million. That's what Mali pays Wagner to fight in Mali. So understand you have conflicting interest in this really bad region. You have countries who want to fight the bad guys to keep them off of this earth and away from our countries, but then you also have other countries who are in these regions to make money. So again, we have a lot of differing factions in the Sahel. Now, here's what the underlying issue is. The country of Mali is falling apart, where you have an uptick of attacks like we've never seen before. Now, Mali has never been fully secured along with the rest of the Sahel, but now that Mali is kicking out the French, they're kicking out the UN, the upticks have increased even though Russia is in Mali, and we'll get into all of that in a second. But you'll notice on this map, all these little dots represent an attack that happened in 2023. So this is an updated map. And you'll notice from these epicenters of attacks, sometimes there's arrows pointing over going into Niger. That's because these groups, these bad guy groups, when they attack good guys, sometimes they'll just walk over into Niger to escape any sort of punishment or getting attacked from Malian forces or security groups. So now you'll notice bad guys are operating in Mali, going back to Niger, going back to Mali, back and forth. The issue is the US military now might be facing a lot of these bad guys going over to where the US military is, because consider this, Niger is also falling apart and doesn't have a proper government military rank structure to actually protect their own country now. Now, historically speaking, the US military has actually had a very bad and a very public experience to where these border regions and border towns where all these militant groups are operating has actually really hurt the US military in a bad way. I hate talking about this, the Tongo incident. You can go ahead and look it up. You had US Special Forces and some regular military assets actually get attacked due to bad reconnaissance, and soldiers didn't make it back. The main reason why I'm even bringing this up, though, is to show you that the US military learned its lesson, unfortunately, that without proper reconnaissance and by operating on these border towns and acting like everything is safe, it's not safe. So to bring things into today's context, that was back in 2017, and things are worse today. The U.S. military doesn't necessarily like to operate on these border towns from the information we are given. They do like to operate drone assets on these border towns, however, to ensure or make sure that we can monitor and watch these militant groups coming into Niger. But understand this, right now, on this date, the U.S. military has moved assets over from Niamey over to Agadez. So the U.S. military is in the same posture. They still have about 1,100 troops in Niger. They haven't downgraded, but they pushed away from the border. They brought assets to Agadez because now they're on the defensive. The U.S. military likes to be on the offensive. They like to strike first. And now that they can't strike first, and they had to move themselves towards the center of the country of Niger to get away from these border regions that are getting worse and worse for the U.S. military. Now, to make things even more complicated and a very big wild card in the whole Sahel region drama, Watch this video. A lot of you guys recognize this. This is Mr. Prigozhin, the guy who had the plane crash in Russia. Many people said Russia took him out on purpose. Nonetheless, this video was shot a day before his plane crashed. And look at the tone of what Russia was saying. You could really see they sort of opened up their door to tell us that we are here in Africa to push away the West, to make Russia look good, and to free Africa. Check this out.
Температура плюс 50. Все как мы любим. ЧВК «Вагнер» проводит РПД. Делает Россию еще более великой на всех континентах. А Африку еще более свободной. Справедливость и счастье для африканских народов. Кошмарим ИГИЛ, Аль-Каиду и других бандосов. Берем на работу настоящих богатырей. И продолжаем выполнение задач, которые были поставлены и которые мы давали обещание, что справимся.
Now, if you're like me, you're a little confused because Wagner seems to be fighting the same people that the US military seems to be fighting. So what's the discrepancy? Like, why wouldn't we just all work together? Because understand this, remember at the beginning of the video, I said you have many different factions who are in the region. Some factions want to provide security. Some factions want some uranium in the countries. Other factions are here to make money. And when Wagner is not securing Mali and they're not able to attack other militant groups, Wagner's not really getting paid and they don't have a reason to be there. I know this sounds all backwards, but you have to think of it from a business perspective. That's how Wagner operates. They need violence in a region in order to make money because now they justify themselves being in Mali. But here's what the issue is. Mali is still getting a massive uptick, even though Wagner is supposed to be securing this country. So we got to look at it from both sides. Is Wagner doing this on purpose to let the militant groups go into Niger, or is Wagner just doing a bad job? I actually have another graph for you to show you where the progression of ever since Wagner went into Mali, it's only been getting worse and worse. Okay, so this graph can be a little intimidating, but we're going to walk through it, and you'll notice there's a red line going up and a greenish blue line going down. That's because the red line indicates the amount of attacks that's been happening in Mali, and there's a direct correlation for the amount of people who are getting kicked out of Mali who were securing the country. So let's go ahead and dig into this map and truly see the timeline and really put things into context how it really does look like Wagner wants this to happen. And as militant groups run free, Wagner has reason to be in Mali and to quote-unquote secure the country. But again, it screws over the U.S. military who's supposed to be defending Niger or working with Niger. If the attacks increase in Niger, what is the U.S. military doing there? I thought they're supposed to be helping this. We'll all bring it together. Let's go ahead and look into this map or graph. Okay, so if you're following African drama as I have and trying to really bring truth to the situation, one thing that is for sure, we see direct correlations of whenever there is a coup happened in 2020 and 2021, you see direct correlations of increases of attacks. Now, again, in Niger, now that there's a coup, we're seeing increases of attacks because what happens is the military is focusing on the coup. The government's focusing on the coup, which means soldiers stay stagnant. The exact same thing happened to the U.S. military, the French, and Niger, where when this coup was happening, what are we supposed to do? Are we about to abandon this country? We've been here for 20 years. And again, when everybody stayed stagnant in Niger, you had militant groups who were trying to recruit the people of Niger, doing bad attacks. They're taking advantage of these coups when nobody's watching them. Now, in 2021, this is where we see the massive shift in forces where Wagner has managed to pretty much get into Mali, strike up a deal in 2021. Now, even back in 2021, this wasn't necessarily highlighted too much, but what was being talked about is now that Russia is dealing with Mali, how is this going to work out dealing with the UN and dealing with the French? But we have a lot of reason to believe that Wagner managed to convince Mali to kick out the French. One thing we do have to understand is that Wagner was actually doing an okay job. I'm not going to say Wagner are good people at all, but they were doing a good enough job to where Mali obviously decided to work with Wagner and pay them a lump sum of $200 million. So again, Mali really liked Wagner, but nonetheless, as Wagner strikes up this deal, you can see in the graph, you start to see still an uptick of violence within Mali. And again, when there's an uptick of violence in Mali, that directly correlates over to Niger. Something else I find interesting on this graph, the junta bans the broadcast of RFI and France 24 and Mali. So again, taking away French influence, taking away French news, and you see in 2022, direct correlation up here, Wagner mercenaries and Mali soldiers allegedly massacred their own people. And this was broadcasted all over the news. But again, whenever you talk about Africa, you talk about it for one day, and then that's it. We're done. We don't need to talk about them anymore. But the reason why I'm showing you these correlations and graphs is because it goes up and up and up and up. And now in 2023, it's getting to the point to where nobody knows what to do. Where is Wagner? Why are these upticks still going up when you promised to secure us? And so the United States, again, might be facing the brunt of the force if these guys go over into Niger. And this is very beneficial for the Russians because if the Russians can make the U.S. look bad in Africa, this is the perfect opportunity now for Russia to go into countries like Niger, where the junta really is trying to work with a major superpower to try and work with their country and try to secure their country economically, but more important, with their own security. And again, all of these dots represent attacks that happen in 2023. And whether it's one attack or 100 attacks, it's still happening. And not only that, these red dots represent Wagner Group. These green dots and purple dots represent the bad guy groups. Again, I wish we could say the word and the name on here, but we can't because I would love to tell you the exact names of these groups. But you'll see they bleed into Niger. I'm trying to harp this into you to let you guys know that although the U.S. military took one step forward, they're actually taking 10 steps backwards because now they can only be on the defensive and not take the fight to the bad guys. So all the U.S. military can do is sit there and wait over in Airbase 201. Another massive wild card throughout all of this conflict is that really all of these countries have a massive issue with the French. Now, there's two sides to the story. Does Russia have influence in this, or do the people of these nations like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, do they really truly themselves hate the French? I think it is a little bit of both because at the beginning of this conflict with Niger, they were willing to work with or at least talk to the Russians. Mali was willing to facilitate some sort of deal. We don't know the exact details, but we do know Prigozhin, when he was alive, was saying, "We will help you in Niger. We'll gladly help you." And again, I think that would have been the worst decision ever for Niger because we see direct correlations in Mali. Now, I don't want to paint this picture that the French are all completely bad, but according to these countries, they just kicking the French straight out. They're arresting their own government officials. They're telling ambassadors you can't even be in our country. So I have no idea how the French are going to navigate all of this. But you can't talk about the U.S. military in these African countries without talking about the French, because the French do work with the U.S. military, but the U.S. military has had to sort of distance themselves away from the French. So another massive issue is if the French leave, the U.S. military are really all on their own fighting all these militant groups. So that can be another underlying threat. And I don't know how the U.S. military is going to be able to do that without deploying more troops and assets into the region. Okay, so that's what's going on with the U.S. military in the Sahel region. Although we are on the defensive, being on the defensive is not always the greatest strategy, but nonetheless, it's still a strategy, and it still allows for the U.S. military to somewhat bring the fight over into the Sahel. Now, there are ways to sort of be on the quote-unquote defensive and still attack, especially if, hey, let's bring our U.S. troops over on the border, and let's see if, let's see if we see anything, and now we get attacked, now we can attack the bad guys. I don't know if the U.S. military is going to do that, considering, we only have 1,100 troops out there. We got to be careful because we might be on our own. Nonetheless, this is what's happening. Mali, Africa is falling apart. They're literally bleeding into Niger. As the U.S. military pulls assets from the capital of Niger, we are on the defensive posture and just waiting to see what happens. I am very proud of the U.S. military for staying out of all this drama. But the unfortunate part is, as we wait and wait, we might find ourselves still in the middle, not of an African regional all-out war, but in an African regional all-out militant war. I can't say the names of these militant groups, but I hope you catch my drift. Anyway, I hope you guys learned something, and we'll see you guys later.